Hello, and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. In today's episode, we talk about an article by Carl Trueman on transcendence, but first we take about an 11-minute divergence and discuss and follow up on two thoughts on our previous podcast on beauty and on NPR and national radio and bias in news. So we do finally get around to the topic, and then we get a little bit of silly and throw in a couple of Napoleon Dynamite references. So this is a bit of a wonky episode, but it does have a point to it if you can stick with it to the end. Hello, and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Nathan Rittenhouse.
And I'm your co-host, Cameron McAllister.
And every once in a while, we do a podcast, and then we run across things that we're like, oh, that's actually what we were talking about. So I want to jump back to to the podcast that we did on beauty. If you're wondering, what in the world were they talking about? Sometimes it helps to look at the opposite. And there was a Wall Street Journal article today called The Uglification of Everything. And it's exactly what Cameron, I think, was trying to say. And so if you have access to the Wall Street Journal, you might want to check that out. Crash course in everybody being sick and tired of their entertainment. Cameron, you read the article too. Was there anything you wanted to say there that stood out to you as a way of kind of clarifying the beauty theme we were speaking on?
Yeah, and it's Peggy Noonan, and I had not seen her name in a long time. So it was really, that was neat. No, one of her observations I thought was really sharp. And so she basically, and it mirrors precisely how I felt. She just gave beautiful expression to it. She said, how is it, she was talking about, I think, a newer performance, a revamped performance of Cabaret, which is filled with lots of obscene stuff. And she said, how is it that something so outlandish and so vile can also be so tedious? That has to be some kind of achievement. And all I can say is, that just rings so true. I mean, I have watched, Nathan, I've seen this trend. Most of our listeners, I've talked about uglification before in the art world and in television and in popular entertainment, and people usually are instantly with you. They get it. They see it right away. Every show that comes out now is filled with dark characters who have horrible pasts. And if they are virtuous, they're not really virtuous. And it turns out they're actually, having numerous affairs and have horrible skeletons in their closet. So it's all very cynical.
She was saying nobody likes any of these new characters. That's kind of
and it's almost, but it's weird. There's a kind of odd sort of prudishness that sneaks in that she draws attention to as well in these shows, as though, it's good for you to see that these are, that people aren't really good. These are, these people are, but the problem is, you got a plausibility problem with that because none of these characters have any charm. They're just not likable at all. She draws attention to The Talented Mr. Ripley, which was adapted into a movie. It's a really good movie, with Jude Law and Matt Damon. And the sociopath in that story, I won't give it away. It's been out for a while, but it's a very twisty story. But those twists depend on a character actually being charming. And she talked about how the newer adaptation, which is on Netflix now, nobody in that show, one person is charming. The trans character is charming. Nobody else in the show is likable at all. So it's not even convincing that they would be taken in by this sociopath because the person is so unpleasant to begin with. But
so
it just,
let's.
But I mean, I think we've all felt that a little bit. Just the sense of it's so obscene, it's gross, but it's also boring. And that's really quite incredible.
We'll just leave that hanging out there. So if anybody wants to go back and think through our beauty episode in terms of uglification, there's a word for you if you're feeling too chipper.
Think of it in terms of its opposite.
You can go uplift your life by thinking about uglification. The other one that was a swing and a miss. Today we want to talk about Truman and transcendence. But the other one that was interesting when we did the one on NPR and bias and National Public Radio and all of that, and like, where do you get your news from? Shortly thereafter, I ran across a statistic that said 30%, a third of people under 30 years old get the majority of their news from TikTok. And so there's one as a news source that we failed to mention, Cameron. Shame on us when we were going through our list of places. But it's interesting about there's a difference between NPR and TikTok in that on some news sources, you expect to know what the bias is. On a 32-second clip, you don't know what the bias is. You don't know anything about that person. There's no editorial process. There's no way to look up or there might not even be a real name attached to it. And so that's a whole nother level of, I don't know what the right word for it is, of uncertainty as far as I don't even know what to say. Anyway,
well,
so
the problem,
TikTok,
my issue with
got
it
to mention
just,
that.
well, it's not just the bias feature, which is, that's very important, but also the speed, the velocity with which this is done. All of that precludes reflection and thought. And this is something that's been a problem for a long time. News has moved rapidly for a long time. It's also morphed into a crude form of entertainment. We've talked about that as well. But when it moves at such lightning speed, I mean, there really is no room whatsoever for any thought. You can't actually mold this over. And so you can take in more, once again, but more is not necessarily better. You can take in more with even less time. So it just continues to, it's little wonder to me that a lot of journalists are kind of almost being backed into a corner by the public. And the public is saying, tell us what we should be thinking right now. Please do our thinking
here's
for us.
Here's a weird parallel. Have you ever, you run across somebody who's like, hey, how's it going? And then they stop and they pause, they think thoughtfully, and then they give you a really robust answer to that question. And you're like, dude, that's not what I wanted. I wanted you to say,
disarming.
Great, yes. Good to see you. So there's a sense in which, like, when somebody actually gives you a thoughtful analysis of kind of what is really should be a very serious question, like, how are you doing today? That's intended to be a heartfelt, thoughtful, emotive, human engaging question. We just use it as like, how's it going? Like, we don't even put the effort into saying it as a whole sentence or, even articulating all of the words within it. It's like the news is almost like that now, where we don't expect it to thoughtfully engage with a meaningful, like, we just want to see the headline. We just want to ask the question and zip off to the next thing.
Get to the good part. Get to the main point. What's interesting about that, Nathan, is all of this is a theme I keep coming back to over and over again when we talk about thinking. You have to slow down. Think well, you have to slow down. Mm-hmm. But everything around us is running in the opposite direction. We have all this machinery, AI, and different software, and it's all meant to, this is going to make things faster. Everything's got to be faster. But I mean, consider what's going on in the news right now. Israel, Hamas. Is there a snippet that's going to give you the main point? And so you can get your head around that completely. The protests, they're happening at Columbia, and actually protests around my neck of the woods at Emory University as well, up the street.
Yep, saw that
is there a quick answer? Right. Is there a quick answer to that? I mean, Russia, Ukraine. Is there a quick answer? Russia, China. Is there a quick answer? I mean, these are matters of incredible complexity. They involve a lot of very sophisticated politics and foreign policy that would actually, most people wouldn't be able to wrap their heads around it properly, which just should give you, but yet everybody is under the illusion that they have the take that they need for all of this, to be informed and have an opinion.
The most pronounced way I see this in my life. So you read the articles about how, like, when you're skim reading, you're kind of making a broad Z pattern across the page. You're not really reading every word. You're kind of reading sentences and groups and scanning for keywords as you go through it. So I think that's a habit for most of us who are trying to blow through something quickly. What's an impediment to that? You can't speed read poetry.
Right.
And so it goes in that thing that irritates me sometimes. Like, the things that force you to go, like speed bumps, like, you hate them, right? I mean, it's the stuff that it almost seems like an insult if your speed is moderated at any limit.
Can I keep us on this digression for a bit longer, because you just did it. You brought up art, and so I think this is important. It's not just poetry that does. It's not just poetry that does that. I did. When you read Middlemarch by George Eliot, you could speed read that, but you would miss and lose so much, because great novels, function like poetry a little bit. They're not the same. Poetry is different from prose, but they function the same in that it's not sharing with you mere information. It's sharing with you in terms of, in a novel, it's a story. And so the way it's written,
well, it's like reading Moby Dick when you're a little kid. You can read it as a story when you're a little kid.
You can, but part of the richness of the language, the complexity of the language, the density of the language. Now, some writers are more economical. You know, the paradigm example is someone like Ernest Hemingway or Raymond Chandler. But even those guys, you have to slow down to appreciate what they're talking about. But definitely some of them build it into the actual structure of their book. Moby Dick is impossible to blow through. And part of that is to get you to slow down and to bring you into a place of contemplation. And there are even some movies that do this. They usually are, you know, I'm thinking of a movie like Bresson's Diary of a Country Priest. I know that sounds a little niche and very art house, and it is.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody listening has seen that.
Right, but and no, of course, right. But I'm bringing it up because there are certain films. Another one would be, the films of Ozu. He's a famous Japanese filmmaker, which you probably haven't heard of because you're not a nerd like me.
Nope.
But he made a film. Yes, well, he made a film called Tokyo Story. He's made several films. That's probably his most famous. These films are deliberately very slow, long takes, very meditative. And they also these directors employed non-actors because they didn't want melodrama, they didn't want sensationalism. What they were trying to do was to bring you as a viewer into a contemplative frame of mind where you would actually slow down and take this in, which is, by the way, very difficult to do with cinema. Cinema is almost predisposed to titillate you and go fast and flat and flashy.
Let me ask you a question.
It does, but sure, please do.
Let me ask you a question. This is a shameless attempt to get us back on topic. Can you?
Okay, I'm sorry.
Can you think? So we do. So we live in this world, the high-paced world, the thinking fast. In fact, there's a book, Thinking Fast and Slow. It's a common one. Can you think quickly about God?
He just died,
or the
by
transcendent? Did he? I didn't know that.
I didn't. I didn't know that either. Yeah, but he did. Yeah.
Anyhow, fun guy to listen to. But can you think quickly about the transcendent, or is that a category in life that necessitates? Because when you're rattling off the film stuff, I thought the Old Testament is like that too.
Mm-hmm.
There are portions of it that if you pick out snippets of it, you're like, what in the world is going on here? But if you zoom out, slow down, look at the overall development of the argument and the concept, that you're like, oh wow, okay, but you can't do it quickly.
No.
Is theology inherently pushed to the back burner in a culture that only processes things that are small doses of things that can be dealt with quickly?
Well,
it seems like too big of a thing to chew in one bite, and we only like bite-sized things.
Well, the transcendence takes us beyond immediate circumstances. And that's the big challenge, because everything around us screams focus on the here and now. And so especially, the speed, the whole, we'll just call it that TikTok frame of mind with the news, because it's not just, what that does is it doesn't just short circuit thought. It doesn't just push you into ever higher levels of, let's face it, addiction. But it also makes you want you crave constant novelty. You want new stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And you're always, and it keeps your focus on the here and now. So what Truman is talking about, Carl Truman, in this article, is he had something very disturbing happen to him when he studied history.
What's the name of the article?
We keep coming. Oh boy, I can't remember the name of the article, but it's going to be in the show notes.
Put you on the spot. Okay. All right. There you go.
So there you go.
It's Carl Truman. But close enough. We got the author.
It's Carl Truman. Yep. Carl Truman at Writing at First Things. We'll link it in the show notes. But he points out, so studying history, reading responsible historians is a disturbing thing, because history is complicated, and it will show you that life doesn't shake down in the neat categories we often think. And what happened to him was he was doing his PhD, and he discovered that one of an academic hero of his, a Lutheran scholar, turned out to be a Nazi sympathizer and voted for Hitler, sided with him, and then just went all in. There's one in particular who was a real hero of him. Their names are going to escape me right now, but you can read the article. But there were two of them. And he asked himself, and the Third Reich is an easy, conspicuous, probably overused example to point to, but it is helpful in the sense that it offers a very clear picture of this immanent versus transcendent, because the church in Germany was faced very much with this question. And so he thought, why did these two not follow in the footsteps of a Dietrich Bonhoeffer or a Karl Barth? Bonhoeffer and Barth, of course, wrote the Barmen Declaration. There was another declaration that they wrote that was more explicitly condemning the anti-Semitism of the Nazis, and that's called the Bethel Declaration. This was news to me, Nathan, by the way. So
yeah, I didn't know that worth.
I didn't either. It's being made newly available now. It's actually about 100 pages worth, so it's book length. But
so that's why nobody reads it.
Right, right. But he was trying to. So what was it? And he said the conclusion he draws was they were. Here's the word he uses, and then we'll make it more practical. These two were immanentizing what was going on. They were focusing only on the here and now to the exclusion of God's actual transcendence of present circumstances. So we care about the world, of course. We're citizens. We're citizens of heaven first, but we are earthly citizens as well. We're aliens here and we're sojourners, but we're invested. We care about our neighborhoods and our communities. We care about our political system. We want to make a difference. But if you come to a juncture where the political system makes demands of you that would include your conscience and your convictions, then the price is too high, and you must choose to put your allegiance. I mean, your allegiance is already to Christ, but you choose you choose Christ and His kingdom, and that comes with a heavy price, and it came with a heavy price for people there. So, I mean, Truman is also careful to point out that he said, I know all of us, hindsight is 20/20, and we would all like to think that we would behave in a much more noble way. But if we lived in those present circumstances and saw the immediate dangers to our family, our livelihoods, we may well have acted differently. I may well have acted differently. He said, not in an honorable way. I may have sided with the Nazis. So that's a constructive thought experiment, and it's not an unusual one.
Let's run with this a little bit.
Yeah,
let's run with it a little bit, because I think actually, Cameron, in the last few weeks, you've seen more references to people saying, "Oh, of course, like if I'm an educated Western person, I'm going to be opposed to anti-Semitism." And then all of a sudden, in the last few weeks, you look at the news and you're like, "Ooh, so that's how these things develop and start."
Right.
So that's pretty spectacular that we live in a time in which
it's horrifying.
I'm going to swing wide. Yeah. Let me swing wide here and try to pull something in. Who was that guy, the Thinking Fast and Slow? Not
Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman.
Kahneman.
Yep.
Daniel Kahneman. One of the things that he points out in some of his stuff is that when you're thinking fast, you never remember it. And when there's no such thing as multitasking, and the information you take in when you're multitasking gets embedded in the wrong part of your memory, and you can't recall it because instinct is recognition. And if you don't have the memory capacity to recognize something for what it is, you won't have the proper instinct in how to respond to it. If that is true, which I think is, then if you're taking in your news in rapid fire snippets of information, you're not going to be able to remember the significance of what any of that means, which means that your memory of what happened in history and then your proper response when those things show up again is going to be warped. So I think you can see some direct consequences of people who, like, I was watching some little clip of somebody at a protest in London, and he was just going around asking people. They were carrying signs that says, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." And he was saying, "What does that mean?" And they're like, "Oh, well, actually, I don't know. I just got this sign from somebody." So is that kind of thing like? How would you march down a street carrying a sign that you don't know what it means? But it actually fits into this way of processing information. Now, to loop back and connect us back to where you're going, the person who does the transcendent, immanent thing in the most hilarious way that I know is Jesus. So think about these examples of they go into Jerusalem and the disciples are like, "Oh, look at these huge buildings." And Jesus is like, "Yeah, all these stones are going to be thrown down." Or they'll say, "Oh, did you hear about this tower that fell?" Luke 13. And he's like, "Yeah, but unless you repent, you too will perish." Like he's always jumping time frames on them in a way that they can't keep up with. Like, do you want me to call down fire?
He's speaking from an eternal perspective, and they just can't. And even Acts chapter 1, Nathan, I think is such a great example too, where they're, "Lord, will you?"
You love this one.
They're with it. Yeah, I love it because they're with the resurrected Jesus. Now, will you at this time be restoring the kingdom of Israel? They still have these look, we got some present day concerns right here. Rome, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, know what I mean? And again, his answer is, it's not for you to know the times that the Father has in mind. But what he's still, and even, so, and then of course, but the big answer is also he ascends his throne. I think for me, this chapter is the Acts chapter 1. We get two accounts of the ascension, one at the end of Luke, and then a more full account in Acts chapter 1. I think it's such a beautiful vision of simultaneously affirmation of the created order and the creation mandate, because you have Jesus's incarnation. That's the most profound affirmation of the created order that there is. He took on flesh. And also transcendence. You got them both. You got affirmation, but then you have transcendence.
Yeah, but you have to have this in the proper. So think about this: is that Jesus's concept of the transcendence does produce stability imminently, but a focus on imminence never produces peace or stability. So it's not that Jesus was anti-imminence; it was that his imminence was framed on a perspective of transcendence. Which, and so, you're talking Acts 1. Well, fast forward, Stephen's getting his head smashed in with rocks, looks into the heavens, and asks God to forgive him. You don't get a better picture of somebody having peace in the imminent while staring into the transcendent than that. And I think that is the exact outworking of, so you had the people who were imminently worried about Stephen, who thought they needed to kill him, Stephen, who was worried about the transcendent and thought he needed to forgive them. Yeah,
and that will test the mettle of your faith, by the way. That's what's happening to many of us, I think, as we face difficult days here in the world and in North America. We're trying, if our hope was in a stability that had more to do with our present circumstances, then we have cause to search our hearts, and it will be trying, but it also can be a kind of awakening. It could be a sobering up sort of moment, and because you take a few steps back and just say, Nathan, you let me quote you to you, because this is something that you've been saying to people.
Oh, great.
That I think is really helpful, because it's very true. It's also a little bit harsh, but it's phrased pastorally, but you've said you're meeting a lot of people who are angry at God for not giving them things he never promised. And
right.
So in a sense, this is going to sound weird, but all the major problems have been solved. It's all been done. It's done. It happened definitively on the cross. Jesus defeated sin and death. And if you belong to him, you are secure, and your overall well-being is secure, your salvation. But in the meantime, what we forget is, yes, but you do still inhabit a fallen world. And this is not called a vale of tears for nothing. And it doesn't mean that that Christians are in some special, protected camp. And, by God's grace, sometimes he does send reinforcements, and he does protect us, but not indefinitely, because everybody dies. Mortality. That's what Jesus is saying in Luke 13, or that's part of what he's saying. Or even, don't fear man who can kill the body, but fear him who can, basically throw the soul into hell. So somebody who holds your eternal destiny in his hands is the one who really has authority, and the one who really ought to be feared in terms of respected, looked to as the one who has your ultimate, who can ultimately save you. We tend to default to thinking, oh no, our hands are in the lives of men. We gotta focus on the here and now. We gotta do what's needful. So yeah, I'm just pointing out this is a real challenge to our these are basic Christian assumptions, but they might be basic, but we haven't probably focused on them and trained in them as well as we ought to have been, because we've been very comfortable in North America. And I think it's not too late. It's never too late. It just means, yes, we need to start taking Jesus at his word, and you remember Dallas Willard's when Jesus says, oh yeah, clothing, what you'll eat, what you'll wear, says, don't worry about those things. Yeah. And he follows that up with, is Jesus nuts? Does he not know about cancer? Does he not know about Ukraine? Does he not know about, well, is Jesus nuts is the question. Either do you really believe it, or in the end, are you going to focus on? Are we really just going to focus narrowly on the here and now, and we need present solutions?
So there's an interesting one I was just reading in 2 Kings, the story where the foreign king comes to get Elijah, and they figure out the city that he's in. And the next morning they wake up, and Elijah's servant looks out, and they're surrounded by chariots and soldiers. And he's like, oh no, the end is here. And Elisha prays, Lord, open his eyes so that he can see. And he's saying, those who are with us are more than those who are against us. And then his eyes are open. He sees the chariots and the horses of fire. That's the transcendent perspective. And it's not like, oh, I get to look out my window and see that. But that is the reality that Christ promises. I don't know why this goofy line from Napoleon Dynamite, Pedro offers you his protection. There's
wow, yeah. Not where I thought you'd be going this morning. Yeah.
Not where you thought I was going. But there's a sense in which there's Christ offers you his protection, like deliver us from evil, is not a flippant prayer. And your prayers don't make sense without a comprehensive view of the transcendent, both when it comes to the reality of evil, but then also when it comes to the promises that are embedded in that. So, the question I want to ask you, Cameron, is can you have introspection? All right, I think I know. If I word it this way, I think I'll know what you say. Can you have healthy introspection without a conception of the transcendent?
Well, before I answer
can you think deeply about who you are without thinking deeply about things that are bigger than you?
Well, I'll only answer that if you give me some of your thoughts. Okay, enough of that. Enough of that. All right. Well, in a word, no, I don't think so. So I think there's a healthy form of introspection, and then there's morbid introspection. Morbid introspection is what we get from somebody like Sigmund Freud, where he tells you, you can't really understand your actual motives and behavior until you look to the dark ocean of the subconscious. There's a softer, more sentimental take on this that you get from Rousseau. Well, if you want to be authentic and true, you must look within, and that's how you find.
Well, yoga is predicated on this.
Oh, goodness, yes. So there's a secular variant of it. There's an Eastern variant. There's a New Age spin on it as well. Mm-hmm. Where you have. So it's either you have hidden inner darkness, or you've got hidden inner riches, and you have treasures inwardly, and you need to. The goal is you've got to get away from societal demands, and you have to pull those inward treasures out so you can be your unique self. Well, that's not healthy. And what's interesting is why it does work up to a point. You can get a little, because you are a spiritual creature. So you do have depths, but they're not your depths. Everything that you have is given. So your life is given to you. And if it was given to you, if you were in fact made by a creator, if you're not in some way part of the great anonymous one, and your individuality is ultimately an illusion, and you one day hope to merge with Brahman or something like that. But if in fact, no, you are a distinct being with a distinct personality, but you were made, the only way you could truly know yourself with any real depth would be to know your maker. There's no other way it could happen. That's just a logical sequence of events. And so that's what we're talking about there. I think that would be my answer to you.
Thanks. I'm glad you took time to do that, because my lips hurt real bad.
Just keep it coming.
We're just keep them going. Let's go back to Truman then here a second, because obviously he's writing this article at this time for a specific reason, which I think, and I was preaching about this recently, that I think if I was Satan, I think my best play against the church right now would be to convince the church that its biggest problems in life are political. And that seems to be, I didn't read the Truman article, but that seems to be the parallel thought here, is that we do live in this imminent frame, barring a little Charles Taylor language there, that focuses very much on immediate solutions, but then also cripples us with fear because we don't really have any confidence in any of the immediate solutions that we see. So that's maybe it's just as simple to say that, but it's harder to live out that reality of keeping the larger God factor at play. But then again, our Father who art in heaven, I mean, that is the repeated slap in the face reminder of transcendence right there.
Yes. I mean, it's so transcendent that you could even throw a football over the mountains over there. That's the last one.
Back in 87. That's the last one.
Back in 87. Yes. So I think, I mean, this is a theme that is pretty perennial for our podcast as well. I mean, really, one of the phrases I use for this is to learning the art of taking an eternal perspective on what's happening. It doesn't mean that you overlook earthly events. It doesn't mean they aren't items of concern. It doesn't mean you're not invested. Of course you're invested. But it also means that if we look to Jesus, he's also overcome the world. And in that notion, we also recognize that we're awaiting his return because we need a new heavens and a new earth. So this present world is passing away. That doesn't mean nothing matters. I like N.T. Wright's quick little soundbite here of, Jesus is coming back. Plant a tree. I think that's right. Plant trees, have children, keep gardens, do good human stuff that you've been made to do. Absolutely. But don't lose hope and don't give in to despair when things don't work out here in earthly terms, because that is also to be expected. And after all, we all conduct our lives in the shadow of our mortality. And if we lose sight of that, I think one of the Puritans this is one area where they didn't get everything right, Nathan, but they got this right. They thought a lot about a good death. That's not a morbid thing to do. That's a helpful thing to do. And if we think about what a good death would be, as in, preparing to be with our Lord and Savior eternally, that can structure our way of looking at life in a way that's very healthy and in a way that is anything but morbid. Might sound paradoxical, but it's true.
Yeah, humans are hardwired to know that we're dying, we feel as though time is infinite, even though we intellectually know that it isn't. And that's a weird paradox to live in, is we think we will live forever, even though we know we don't, or we act like we will, even though we know we don't. And so the transcendent gives us actually a realism that enables us to live in this imminent world very well. Because our lives are properly contextualized in that way, and that just brings a phenomenal amount of peace and stability and calmness. So, yeah, let not your heart be troubled. I've overcome the world. That's a deep line right there, and if you skim read it, you miss it. But if you think about it a little bit, you're like, yeah, actually, turns out Jesus knew what he was talking about.
He did indeed. Yeah, so
there you have it.
Mull that over. Yeah, there you have it. Mull it over. Think about it. Watch Napoleon Dynamite again because it is funny. And thanks for tuning in. You've been listening to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast where we think out loud about current events and Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.